In World War II, men were drafted into service who had skills that were not necessarily suited to life as a soldier. There were farmers who had never fired a gun, but were now expected to take up arms against tyranny. But there were also cases where people's unusual jobs actually made them better soldiers than most. Take, for example, pilots. While flying planes may seem like an unlikely skill to translate well to the battlefield, in some circumstances, it could make you a very effective soldier. For the Soviet Union during World War II, their pilots were so important that they even started training animals to fly planes. And while those efforts didn't really pan out, they did manage to come up with one of the most exciting pilots of the war, Ivan Kozhedub. Ivan was born in the small Ukrainian village of Bordanivka on June 8, 1920. His father was a railroad worker who taught his son how to fix engines and other machinery, which would prove to be an important skill later on. At age 14, Ivan was already working as a mechanic at the local farm, but his mind was on becoming a pilot. In 1937, he joined a flight school and earned his wings after only 6 months, a record-breaking achievement. He was then assigned to a fighter aviation regiment, where he trained new pilots and performed aerial acrobatics in between battles. But it wasn't long before his talents would be put to use in a whole different way. When Operation Barbarossa was announced, Germany's surprise attack into the Soviet Union caught everyone off guard. The unprepared nation scrambled to send any able-bodied men to the front lines. And suddenly, Ivan found himself drafted into the army and sent to fight. Just a few years earlier, he'd been showing off fancy flying moves. Now he was told to get in the back of a tank and serve as a gunner. As much as he wanted to protest, this was his country, and he had no choice but to do his part. So he became the gunner on a T-60 light tank under the command of Vasily Zolotarev. Now, if you know anything about tanks, you probably know that being the gunner is a pretty serious job. The gunner is responsible for everything that comes out of the tank's turret. They are the ones who aim the cannons and fire at enemy positions. If you screw up, you could miss your target, allowing it to escape or worse, put your own men at risk. It requires someone with a steady hand and clear head, basically the complete opposite of what you imagine a typical hotshot pilot would be like. But despite lacking experience, Ivan was actually quite good at his new role. It turns out that his previous experience operating machinery and his time spent maintaining aircraft had given him a lot of insight into how things worked. This allowed him to quickly figure out how to operate the tank's cannon, and soon he was hitting targets from up to 2,000 meters away. However, despite his skill, Ivan still wanted to do more. There were times when he and his crew came across enemy positions that were just too well defended to take on directly. They needed to move in and destroy the enemy from within their trenches. But who was going to do the infiltrating? No one volunteered, so Ivan took matters into his own hands. After all, he was the one who was good enough to shoot a cannon from 2,000 meters away. Surely he could hit a target a few feet in front of him. Surprisingly, the answer was yes, but it wasn't easy. What made this kind of fighting possible was the introduction of the RB-61 bazooka. Unlike a normal rifle, which had a smooth bore that shot a single projectile, the RB-61 was rifled, which meant it could stabilize rockets in flight. These rockets were then guided by an operator who could aim them with far greater accuracy than any artillery piece of the time. What made it especially useful was its size. It wasn't huge, so it could be carried around without too much difficulty. It was even small enough to fit inside a tank's turret, which meant that gunners like Ivan could bring the power of artillery right along with them. But it was also the RB-61 size that presented a unique challenge. You see, there was no way to mount the rocket launcher onto the tank itself. That meant that whoever was wielding it would have to do so manually. Of course, that could mean holding it up to shoulder and firing it off like a giant RPG. But if you wanted any semblance of accuracy, you'd have to set it up first, and that meant kneeling down in the open, making yourself a very easy target. This problem was only made worse by the fact that to reload the launcher, you first had to dismantle it, making the whole process of shooting a rocket take a full 3 minutes. It was a long time to be stuck outside a tank with nothing but a rifle for protection. Despite these problems, Ivan pressed on, determined to make good use of the bazooka. Soon he was leading entire assault groups into battle. Oftentimes, he would lead his tank crew and infantry team members into enemy territory, stopping only when he found the right position to fire. Then he would roll up his sleeve, unveil his rocket launcher, and blow apart whatever lay in his path. Of course, this was quite dangerous, but Ivan didn't care. By this point, he'd already received 2 medals for his service. He'd fought in dozens of battles and seen many friends die. He was used to danger and cared little for his own safety. All that mattered was doing his job and winning the war. He and his crew were given the nickname Baba Yaga, after the scary old witches that lived in the forest in Russian folklore. And they became a force to be reckoned with. No one knew exactly how many tanks and other vehicles Ivan destroyed during the war, but the numbers range from 30 to 50. He and his crew fought all over the Eastern Front, from Leningrad to Odessa. Finally, in April of 1945, Ivan was given an award for destroying 40 German tanks and 12 armored vehicles. It was the perfect ending to an amazing career as a soldier. So where did he go after the war? Well, it turns out Ivan was pretty happy being a soldier, so he continued serving in the military after the war ended. He eventually retired as a major in 1960 and went to work as a civilian engineer. But this didn't last long because in 1966, Ivan was called back into service. The Soviet Union was in the middle of the Six-Day War and they needed all the help they could get. So Ivan returned to his old unit as an instructor, helping to train young pilots to defend their country. He would continue doing this until his death in 1991. Ivan's story is an interesting look into how World War II affected more than just the people who were fighting in it. The war completely upended the lives of countless people, forcing them into situations that they never thought they'd be in. And sometimes it can put people into roles that play to their strengths. For example, in Ivan's case, his background as a pilot helped to make him one of the best gunners in the Soviet Union. So do you think you would have done well during World War II? Let me know your thoughts below, and thank you for watching.